This week on To the Contrary, a New Jersey diocese agrees to one of the largest settlements in U.S. history, charging the Catholic Church with sex abuse. Then, critical race theory is a top reason cited for the rejection of 41% of new math textbooks in Florida. And with the expiration of enhanced child tax credits, is the U.S. turning its back on poor children? Hello, I'm Bonnie Bay. Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, the latest on the Catholic Church and child sex abuse. A New Jersey Catholic diocese agreed to an $87.5 million settlement for claims of priest pedophilia. It's one of the largest settlements so far involving the Catholic Church. Some 56 priests and one deacon have been connected to the Camden Diocese abuse scandal involving some 300 alleged victims. The settlement also calls for new protections for children. The suits followed an action by the state lengthening the statute of limitations. It now allows victims of sexual abuse by priests to sue up until they turn 55. The settlement must still go before a bankruptcy judge. Joining me today are Latifa Lyles, former director of the Women's Bureau at the Department of Labor, Carrie Sheffield of the Independent Women's Forum, Sam Bennett with the New York Amsterdam News, and Amala Ekpunobi, show host at PragerU, a conservative media company. Welcome, Latifa Lyles. This settlement is one of many that we've seen in a row over the past 5 or 10 years with the priest pedophilia scandal. Is it over or is it still going on? And if it's still going on, are we going to have to wait 20 years to find out about it?
Well, hopefully not. I mean, this case is really an indication that, unfortunately, the more we peel back the onion, the more there is. But in this case, with the improvement or, the idea that you can still sue and the statute of limitations being expanded, which we really hope to see across the country, honestly, the fact that people have, literally no time to bring these cases, the fact that they could bring this case, the civil case for damages, is really significant. There's no amount of money that can turn back the clock of time and repair the damage and the trauma that has been done to these people's lives and their families' lives. So I think that any remedy, certainly the more we can do in the criminal space as well. But this is really, I think, for states to take notice, and those states who don't have reform around statutes of limitations need to get on board.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Your thoughts, Amala, and welcome.
I actually agree. I think this has brought in light to a massive problem, not only in this area, but we saw the Boston Globe break a story on this years ago, and just the different hierarchies that were happening within this church that were able to cover up this complete abuse of power against young children and how it was connected with the local governments in these areas. I'm going to speculate and say that there are more states and more cities that have experienced this exact problem, and there need to be investigations looking into this, because I'm sure there are hundreds of more victims who need to be heard and need to be really compensated for what they have been through. Because like Latifa said, this abuse has happened. There's no taking it back. There's no erasing it. It's a very unfortunate abuse of power by what is meant to be a trusted institution.
The church keeps trying to improve its protections for children against rape, against being abused by the priest pedophiles, but there's no evidence that it's working yet.
I agree with everything my colleagues are saying here, but I think it's very important to recognize that even when sexual abuse is reported, even when it's ferreted out by local media, as it was with the Boston Globe, and working for local media myself here at Amsterdam News, the nation's oldest and most influential Black newspaper, local media has played a very important role in exposing all this and putting the pressure that needs to happen. But when sexual abuse itself is so vastly underreported. It's estimated that probably only 1 in 6 rapes is ever reported. So I think that we have to assume that this is the tip of the iceberg that we're dealing with right now. I agree with my colleagues. There is no financial award that can be big enough, right, to compensate victims. Having been sexually trafficked myself and sexually abused myself, I can speak very poignantly to that. But the challenge, I think, in all of this is, and someone pointed this out, this is a trusted institution that is centuries old, right? That has a culture of covering up such malfeasance. And even when you fast forward to a younger organization like Boy Scouts, my grandfather was the national director of Cub Scouts, the longest serving officer in scouting history. He would turn over in his grave right now if he saw some of the sexual abuse scandals that are even coming up in a relatively younger organization like this. So I think across our culture, this is only the tip of the iceberg, both organizationally and across our culture.
Carrie, what has this done to the church's reputation generally? In Europe, where there are more people with advanced degrees than in the United States, churches are empty. Is that going to happen here? Is it happening here?
Well, it's interesting because Pew Research does some really great research on faith and public life, and they have increased what they say is the rise in nuns, and I don't mean Catholic nuns, but NONES nuns, people who don't affiliate with any faith at all. And I say this as a recovered nun myself. I was agnostic for a while, but I became Christian. Part of why the rise of the nuns is happening is because people do see, I believe sometimes people, and I know myself when I was agnostic, I confused, people who wear God's collar or use God's name. I was raised in the Mormon church, and unfortunately the mandatory reporting requirements are not really present or enforced within the Mormon church as well. And so when people see that, they confuse the name of God with God himself. And I think that is one of the most tragic forces that's pressuring on Western civilization right now. And so as someone who does believe in God and is a Christian, I pray for the churches, because they're the ones who are, supposed to be doing the best work on earth. As a Christian, that's what you're supposed to be, doing God's work. And so I think that, the traditions of Western civilization are under assault right now by lots of different forces. And we need to reform it. Christians should be at the forefront pushing for these reforms, the strongest, to reform the Christian church itself. And, mandatory reporting requirements, I think, are a very key enforcement mechanism that really need to be focused on.
Agreed.
All right, from the church to the classroom. In 20 states across the country, control, down to the words used in textbooks and what is taught in the classroom, is decided by state government. The New York Times reported distinct textbook differences between the way, for example, red Texas and blue California write about U.S. history and topics such as gun control. This year, the problem subject is math. Florida's Department of Education rejected nearly half the suggested math textbooks for the 2022-23 school year because they say the books violate state laws, barring the teaching of critical race theory and other so-called divisive concepts. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has gotten involved, claiming he is keeping kids safe from wokeness and critical race theory referenced in these math problems. The Department of Education has not yet provided examples deemed impermissible. Carrie Sheffield, I saw some of the examples by an online journalism organization. They were such things as a picture of an African-American mathematician who was renowned for his work. He lived during the 20th century, and the mention of Maya Angelou's name. How does that stand as some kind of critical race theory?
Well, Bonnie, I'd have to look at those specific examples to be able to speak to that context. But I do know generally what's happening in Florida is that, as you mentioned, education happens at the state level. Florida, it's a laboratory for democracy. And Governor DeSantis's approval rating has been going up since he has implemented these reforms. And we're seeing the popularity that he has heading into re-election. He now has double-digit lead over Democrat opponents. So I think the people of Florida are speaking very strongly about this. And in fact, his victory initially was due in large part to Latino and African-American support in Florida. So what people are saying about this, and I'm a Virginia voter, I voted for Glenn Youngkin here, and it was a similar situation where parents stood up and they said, we want to have a say in our children's education. Here in Virginia, Terry McAuliffe said, no, I don't think that's the case. And boy, he got it in the backside. And so I think that's what we're seeing in Florida is that parents want to be involved. And another factor that I don't think was mentioned in the intro was Common Core was another very big reason why a lot of these textbooks were rejected. Common Core is needlessly adding 5 steps to one equation when it should be just one step. And so it's confusing students. And then in addition, layering on incredibly racially divisive and demeaning concepts. And what I find interesting also from
in a math book, though, I mean, I could maybe understand it in a sociology textbook or political science or something of that nature, but math?
Well, and that's what's incredible is that you see the progressive left saying that mathematics is racist. And so they're the ones who really started this. And so they're trying to, what they see, reform math by introducing these very divisive concepts.
Let me go to Latifa. Is the progressive left polluting math textbooks with references to critical race theory?
Absolutely not. I think this is another example of the really widespread disinformation campaign that has unfortunately just taken charge and taken hold of this really helpful conversation that we could be having in this country about how we can be forward-looking, comprehensive, and true to the roots of this country, making sure that our children have the most rounded, worldly, and truthful knowledge about the world, how it works, and the history of this country. And unfortunately, we're not talking about that. We're responding to these really outrageous, inflammatory claims, and a lot of parents are in their fears or perhaps their uncertainties turning into fears or being stoked because people believe that this is an issue that they can use in their campaigns to say, once again, there is some liberal agenda to upend your life and to take over the minds of your children, which is absolutely ridiculous.
Ridiculous.
Go ahead, Sam.
Well, having run for U.S. Congress in 2008, I know what it's like to be at the receiving end of some of these diatribes. I think this is all political posturing. And when it creeps into something that should be education for children should be something that is above and beyond politics. It needs to be sacrosanct. We need to be dealing with facts. To be honest, I think what happened in Florida makes me think of Fahrenheit 251, right? Where we burned books.
451.
451. Thank you. Oh, my math was wrong. But I think we have to be very careful as a society that education needs to be outside of the realm of politics and political posturing, which this is all about. And when it comes to your comment, Carrie, I have to respectfully disagree with your castigation of Common Core. Common Core is one of the most innovative math approaches that this country has seen, turning it into something that is easily comprehensible and embraced by students. So again, I think what's happening is Florida is not the bastion of American democracy. I will also respectfully disagree with you. However, has a booming economy, a lot of migration in, a lot of political foment, which you would expect in a pivotal state like that electorally. But I think this is one step too far, a bridge crossed that shouldn't have been.
Carrie, you want to respond?
Yes, U.S. mathematic global rankings have been dropping. So I think the results actually speak against what you're saying, Sam, in terms of being innovative and useful in any sort of way.
Well, I have to say, one of the reasons Common Core was developed was to help reposition our country when it comes to mathematics. It's a new program exactly designed to help correct, as I agree with you, an unacceptable decline or stagnation of our standing globally in math.
All right, Amala.
If I could hop in here, as a former Floridian myself, there is definitely critical race theory being taught in the state, or in an effort to teach critical race theory in the state. If we want to look at examples of math problems where this is present, here's a math problem from an elementary school that says, what is the probability that a random child selected in poverty is white? Then it asks, what is the probability that a random child selected in poverty is black? The last question on this is poverty independent of race? Is this something that we should be discussing in math class? Absolutely not. And we talk about this as if Ron DeSantis is the only one going through these textbooks, reading this and finding it. He actually brought together a group of administrators, of tenured teachers, to look through these textbooks, find the things that were wrong, and get them out. And a lot of the reporting on this, I must say, I'm really disgusted by, because they're saying that 54 of these textbooks were taken out because of critical race theory. That is not true. It was only about 28 of those textbooks. And again, they were looked through by teachers who found evidence of this. We should not be having discussions about race in elementary school classes, and not in this light. And we talk about this Stop Woke Act that Ron DeSantis put out. In that act, if you go and read the bill, it says we want to have distinct conversations about American history that tell the full truth of slavery, of Jim Crow, of all the transgressions. However, you don't get to tell people that they should feel bad about their race, or about white privilege, or saying that meritocracy is an extension of white supremacy. Those are the things that are being taught in school. It is an extension of critical race theory. That is a law theory that has now been distilled down for K through 12. And they are attempting to indoctrinate kids with this, not just in the state of Florida, but in states across the nation. And it needs to be gone.
Let me just jump in and ask you, the bigger states in this country, the Floridas, the Texas, California, New York, they pretty much dictate which textbooks are going to be sold across the country, because the publishers want to make money. They want to sell as many textbooks as possible. So when Florida wants a textbook one way, they will print more of those and not print other textbooks that may use Common Core. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Is that tyranny of the minority?
I have to say, historically, the question on the table right now is our system meeting the needs of our students? And the answer is no. And it hasn't been for a very long time. It's a combination of school resources, to some extent textbooks, but that's not really the point. I don't believe for a second that the Republicans in Florida are interested in having a conversation about, the history of slavery in this country, number one. Number two, I believe very, very strongly that, it's about choice. It's about what feels okay. The decisions to pull these books aren't because, this is factually incorrect information. It
Right.
comes down to style. It comes down to culture, and it comes down to, what individuals in a particular community are comfortable with. And the question for us is, do we have an arbiter that is not biased, who is making sure that the information that teachers are teaching children and the facts are distilled in a way that are unbiased, fair, and really honest to the facts? I mean, and we're talking,
Okay,
I mean math and history as well.
Amala, your response to that, and then we're out on to the next story.
So I'm not advocating that we teach conservative indoctrination in schools. I just want math, science, reading, writing to be taught. And if you implement critical race theory in these subjects, which they are doing, and it is unfactionable, it is wrong to teach kids and separate them into affinity groups where they're deviated by race and meant to have these discussions, or to tell children, little children in as young as 5 years old, that white privilege is in existence. And if you are black, you are born in a system that's put barriers in place for you. That is factually incorrect.
Well, for people who live on the moon, it might be factually incorrect. But for most kids, those realities are playing out in their lives every day.
From school curriculum to child poverty. The expanded child tax credit is dead, despite experts saying it was extremely effective in lowering child poverty rates. The tax credit will go from a maximum of $3,600 per child back to its original level before Joe Biden took office, $2,000 maximum. Experts say the expansion was a success and helped pull millions of children out of poverty. President Biden intended to make the expansion permanent as part of his Build Back Better program. But that law is stuck in the Senate, where the Democrats' two most conservative members have refused to back it. Sam Bennett, was expanding it a good idea? And will Senators Manchin and Sinema be the roadblocks to expanding it even maybe part way?
I think it's absolutely a brilliant idea to expand it. Here we have a low-cost program, right, that works, that was successful, that's economically based. What could be better than that, right? So, of course, it should be expanded. I am completely flummoxed by how anyone would have an objection to the expansion of this program. I would look to possibly my conservative colleagues to illuminate my darkness. And what could be more important in our country than raising children out of poverty? In any country, by the measure of the least of us is the measure.
But wait a minute. The problem here with passing it is not Republican. It's the two Democrats from West Virginia and Arizona.
And I honestly, I'm asking them, I'm not doing it as a challenge. I'm saying, can someone explain to me? I am completely flummoxed. This is such a no-brainer passage. Now, could it be that the conservative arm, and I did not mean any disrespect, Carrie, my apologies, but if the conservative arm of the Democratic Party is exerting a stranglehold on something as fundamental and simple as that, I'm completely at a loss. I can't sound particularly articulate on this issue because I myself am confused. This is a no-brainer.
I think I can speak to some of the issues that I think the Democrats are seeing with this, if you'd like. One, there's no work requirement for this child tax credit expansion. So you're getting this tax credit expansion and not being asked to be employed. So it's going to parents who are not seeking employment. So you're essentially just giving out free money. There's also, it doesn't seem to be a low enough cap on income when it comes to looking at the tax credit. So you have parents making upwards of $100,000 getting this extra money from the government, which, let's be honest, is money from us. It is our tax dollars. We are paying for this in part. And I think those are some of the problems that Joe Manchin saw with this that he felt like needed to be fixed. We are all for getting children out of poverty. I think it's disgusting that we have so many children experiencing this, but we need to have a discussion about how, because if we're not incentivizing people going out and getting jobs and seeking employment, and we are giving money to those who do not need it and make enough income to provide for their children, we are doing something wrong.
Having covered Congress for many years in the 80s and 90s, it seems like that's a simple fix. You put a clause in the law that says this is only for people who make up to $60,000 a year. But the fact is, it's been spent on food, rent, all the really basic things. A lot of conservatives who don't like it say they're spending it on drugs and booze. That's not the case.
That's not the case.
They're spending it on children.
There's also the issue of inflation. So last month, 8.5% inflation. That is a tax essentially on especially poor and working class families. And so even though wages are nominally rising, they're actually not, because the wages are rising lower than the price of inflation. And one of the primary drivers of inflation is government spending. So if you actually want to help poor and working class families with real dollars, with income, with their wages that have been earned in the real economy, instead of treating the US dollar like it's fake monopoly money, putting us $30 trillion into debt, saddling future generations with debt, we need to be encouraging work. As Amala said, put some work requirements in this bill, which it does not include. And any time, whether it's a conservative Democrat or a Republican who puts a work requirement proposal on the table, they get screamed at, they get called racist, they get called white supremacist. You know, we can't have an honest conversation about poverty in this country and about inflation in this country without people calling names. And so I respect that we're doing that on this program, but unfortunately it doesn't happen on the Senate floor or on the House floor.
Honestly, I've served as a governor appointee on our Board of Assistants in my county now for almost 30 years. And I can tell you right now, the people that are on our rolls that we're helping are people that are disabled, that do not have a way to live. And we have people that are working 3 jobs in some cases and still need medical assistance because they're not being paid enough. So I push back on this idea that government spending is the problem. There's been a whole body of economic thought that disputes that absolutely irrefutably. The bottom line is anything we can do for children, bottom line, we should be doing. And if you put a work requirement in it, we don't need it.
The findings are really clear that these funds were used to really keep families surviving and their children thriving. And this is not a program that is going to cripple our economy. This is a program that can pay for itself 3 times over the course of 10 years. And it's going to be really, hard for us to move forward if we continue to grapple with these 2 senators who, at this point, it's impossible to know the hang up. And it's really, frankly, a slap in the face to American families.
Okay, that's it for this edition. Let's keep talking on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and visit our website, pbs.org/tothecontrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.
Funding for To the Contrary provided by the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation, the Park Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation.
For a transcript or to see an online version of this episode of To the Contrary, please visit our PBS website at pbs.org/To the Contrary.
Be more PBS.